Sarah Firth reporting from Athens there. Well, for more on this, let's get some analysis from World Affairs commentator Marco Vicenzino. Marco, so Alexis Tsipras, then the Prime Minister, says calls on voters to reject the sirens of scaremongering. This referendum really is on a knife edge at the moment. Are comments like that going to resonate with the voters?
Well, last Saturday, when he gave his speech in Parliament for the approval of the referendum, he invoked the words of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his 1933 presidential inauguration, which was, "There's nothing to fear but fear himself." But he himself is engaging in fear-mongering against the yes vote, saying that voting yes will be slavery for Greece. In reality, his no vote, he thinks it'll give him leverage in Europe. According to his narrative, vote no, give me a mandate, I'll go to Europe in 48 hours, I'll have a deal, and then the banks will reopen.
And also, Marco, when it comes to several sort of European officials who have complained in the strongest terms about Greece's abrupt decision to hold this referendum on the terms of a bailout offer that they say is no longer on the table. What are the terms on offer here, and what does each side want to happen?
Basically, the Greek government wants they want debt cancel. They want a good amount of debt cancellation, less austerity. Basically, relief also for the pensions, no increases in VAT. What Europe wants is the structural reforms necessary. Europe, at the end of the day, basically, they'll agree to a lot of that, but before they agree to something like that, they want to make sure that they have commitments and assurances from the Greek government that these structural reforms will take place. Basically, they don't want to give something for nothing in return.
Do you think that the Greek voters understand really what is at stake here and the consequences?
Increasingly, yes. They're still struggling to understand what they're going to vote for. But I think it's becoming more and more, as the banks have shut in recent days, reality has set in that if they exit the euro and they get no money from the European Central Bank, what they see right now will become even a greater catastrophe. So it just won't be about shut banks. It'll be about scarcity of food, shelves of the supermarkets being empty, not having access to cash or any liquidity, and then, like I said, a real catastrophe setting in. It's the day after the referendum. If it becomes clear that there's going to be no deal with Europe, for the ordinary Greek citizens, this will spell disaster.
We've seen scuffles on the streets between police and anti-austerity protesters. Is this a sign of many more things like this to come? Is unrest and potentially violence set to take place if we don't get a deal?
In recent days, we've seen initial scuffles between pro and anti-austerity, anti-austerity and pro-European supporters. There is the chance, if the banks don't reopen, if there's an ambiguous result, if there is no progress after the referendum, the chance of civil unrest increases dramatically, in my opinion, because once again, if people don't have the basics to live on a daily basis, things can get very ugly.
This will come as the IMF have downgraded Greece's growth projection from 2.5% back to 0%. So is there any hope that they can get the economy growing again, or at least some form of stability in the economy?
The IMF said that in a recent report, it said basically that Greece over the next 3 years needs over $66 billion injected into its economy. And then in addition to that, it needs to have part of its debt canceled. So as a result, you could see the magnitude of the situation in Greece right now. The idea is that the Europeans, I think at the end of the day, there's a full understanding that some form of relief, of debt relief, is necessary. But they don't want to do it from the European perspective. They don't want to have to be forced to do so via blackmail and nothing in return. Once again, those structural reforms that they're demanding in order to give more money.
And in the coming days before the referendum, are we set to see more brinkmanship from both sides?
I think the game of brinksmanship for now has been temporarily suspended. We're 48 hours to the referendum. Suspended in the sense that, yes, Tsipras is continuing with his rhetoric, his anti-yes rhetoric, but from Europe, basically, Europe is on standby. We'll see what happens with the outcome of the election. From there, whether it's a yes or a no, the game of brinksmanship may resume, but it won't last for much longer because the money is due, particularly on July 20th, is over $3.5 billion that's due to Europe by Greece. And if that money isn't given by then, the IMF still hasn't declared Greece in default. It has up to a month from June 30th to the end of July to declare default. if Greece doesn't come up with the money on July 20th, and Europe is a primary creditor, it'll spell disaster for Greece in terms of its position in the euro, and then from that point onwards, the IMF may just declare them to be just bankrupt, more or less, in default, and then from there, everything else, the whole process just unravels. It becomes an ugly situation.
Marco Vicenzino, thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank
Good
you.
to speak to you as always.